Hey guys, I'm Steven with Aquatic Pools. So the most common question we get every single day is people ask us, how much do pools cost? So we're here to answer the age-old question, how much do they cost? Now today's is August of 2025, so obviously costs are going to change over time. So I'm going to say this video is probably going to be good up until the end of this year. Now, I see a lot of companies advertising pool packages, say, hey, a pool package costs at $55,000 or whatever it is. There is not a one size fits all with pools. Your property may not be able to accommodate that pool. Your property may have elevations. Your property may be this or that and not be able to fit a pool. So you can't just, as a company, advertise a single price, go out there and say, hey, this is how much the pool costs. Every property is different. So when you guys call and you guys say, hey, how much is that pool? The same pool might cost different at your property because you may live on a hill and you may require a retaining wall. You may require this or that, with your property, such as you may have overhead lines that you have to move. You may have trees in the way that you have to get cut. You may have sprinkler systems. So every property is different. Now, one of the biggest factors that I see, because I design and sell pools myself, and I also have a designer that works for me, is the finishes. So the finishes is one of the biggest factors in cost. If you pick these three finishes on an average pool, let's say it may be $60,000 pool. So if you look at these finishes, and you design a pool, and let's say we estimate it for $60,000, and you change to these finishes, your pool just went to about $80,000-$90,000. So finishes are a huge factor. There's no looking at a design, getting a price, and then being able to hold that price. Finishes, just like flooring, you can buy 99-cent flooring, or you can buy flooring that's $20 a square foot. It's the same thing with finishes on a swimming pool. One of the biggest factors that I see when people are designing pools, as far as that raises the cost, is the size of the deck. Everybody wants big decks, which I get. Everybody wants to hang out, everybody wants patio furniture, but especially when you're getting a screen enclosure, the decks are expensive. And also, if you get a screen enclosure, it follows the circumference of the deck, so that raises the cost as well. So the size of the pool isn't a huge factor as far as cost. It is a factor. It does raise or lower the cost of the pool, the actual size of the pool, but the deck is one of the biggest factors in the cost of the pool that I see, when designing. But guys, another thing, we're seeing right now is people are getting 5, 6, 7 estimates from different contractors. You guys need to know this isn't like buying a vehicle where you can go from contractor to contractor to contractor and beat them up as far as cost goes, and at the end of the day you get the same product. It does not work like that. Every contractor is different, and it is these small things that make or break a job, such as waterproofing the tile line. That is literally an hour's worth of work. If I don't do that, you're going to be dealing with efflorescence or white, haze on your tile for the lifetime of the pool. So apples aren't apples when you're looking at the estimates. You got to get into the fine details of the estimates to compare them. It's not just the design, looking at the deck and saying, hey, this deck's 650 square feet, this pool is 400 square feet, and the screen enclosure is X, square feet, and saying, hey, I'm going to compare the two estimates. It does not work like that. I can use very cheap materials and save a lot of money, or I can use very expensive materials and do a good job. There's a difference, and you guys need to ask those questions. And there's a lot of things you can leave out in an estimate too, such as running power to the equipment. Most companies don't include that in the estimate. So that can be a couple extra $1,000 charge. It's hard when you guys are just getting a bunch of estimates, comparing them, to actually sit down. You guys need to sit down with the contractor and ask questions, not just get these estimates, lay them out on your kitchen table and go, oh, this one's 60, this one's 60, this one's 80, let's throw that one out. Well, that $80,000 one might be including everything, and that $60,000 one might be, leaving out a whole bunch of stuff. You're going to pay for it. You have to pay for it. The county or the city requires you to do landscaping to get a final approval on your permit. So it's not like you can say, I don't want to do landscaping, blah, blah, blah. You have to. And if you're doing St. Augustine, grass or Georgia, you have to do sprinkler systems. You can't do St. Augustine without a sprinkler system. The grass will die. So usually we tell people to save about 10% of the project cost for landscaping and irrigation. And that usually, lines up correctly. Also, there's fencing. Also there's access. So, we have to resod the access and all that stuff. If it's very rare that we break a sidewalk because of the machinery that we use, we have rubber tracks on it and we protect the sidewalks. But if we do replace the sidewalk, that's not something you guys have to do or pay for. That's something that's included. But yeah, every day, guys, we get the question of how much do pools cost? On the internet, we get it. People email us, people walk in our showroom. It is not a one size fits all statement. I can't say, hey, this pool was $80,000 at this property. At your property, it may be $70,000 or it may be $90,000 depending on the elevations. If you live on the water, guys, and this does not include retention ponds, such as the ponds in the neighborhood. This means canal or open water or St. John's. It's going to be more. We have to design retainage. So any kind of impervious surfaces that goes over the limit of the property, we have to calculate for 1 inch of rainfall and retain that water. So that means swales. So that means we have to hire an engineer to design and stamp off that. We have to, pay for the permitting, and we have to do the work of digging the swale, at the end. So, that's going to cost more. So if you live on a canal or you live on the river, you can automatically add $1,500, $2,000 to the cost of a pool because of those factors. That and groundwater. So groundwater is a situation if we have to do well points. The well points are $200 a piece. If we hit coquina, if we hit seawall tiebacks, there's a number of different things. We've hit cisterns, we've hit old pools before, so there's a whole slew of things that can cost you more, the swimming pool. So let's talk about the basic cost of a swimming pool. Usually I tell people pools cost, starting out at $60,000. Now there's no minimum. We have a spreadsheet. When we design these pools, we have a spreadsheet. We plug in the numbers. If it's X amount of yards of concrete, if it's X number of square feet of deck, if it's X number of square feet of screen, there is no minimum. So it's not like, hey, we're saying the pool start us. That's just, it's hard to build a pool under $60,000 nowadays. So usually we say pools start at $60,000. What's that get you? Pool without a spa. Sun shelf, if you want it. Most people want sun shelves. Sun shelves are usually about $1,500 to add, so it's not a huge cost. And usually about 3-4 foot of deck surrounding the pool. Whether that be concrete or pavers, those are most cost effective. When you get into travertine, or slate or shell lock or any kind of, high end flooring or decking, that's going to significantly raise the cost of the project. So usually pool spas, how much is a spa going to add to the pool? You got to think, one, you add a heater, to the situation. Two, you add the actual spa. So there's the tile work, there's the actual concrete of the spa, there's the decking or whatever else you do. So usually on average, a spa adds about $10,000, $15,000 on a project. Now people might say, hey, a spa is a $5,000 addition. Well, that may not include the heater. That may not include a blower for the system, meaning the Venturi jets blowing out air. That may not include a whole slew of things. A heater to a pool is usually $5,000-$6,000. That's a big expense. So there's a whole bunch of things to factor in. So usually pool spas, I tell people they start out about $80,000, and go up. Screens, so screens usually are around $15,000-$20,000 for an average screen. Yes, they can be less expensive. Yes, they can be way more expensive, if you got a huge house. But screens, are going to add $15,000-$20,000 to the project. So if you just design an $80,000 pool and you want to put a screen enclosure, now you're at $95,000-$100,000. So that's a huge, cost. So usually I tell people pool spa screens start out at $90,000+. Now this doesn't mean you have to design a $150,000 pool. The biggest factor to cost other than the design is the finishes. You can make a $60,000 pool, a $90,000 pool real quick by picking expensive finishes. Everybody wants glass tile. Everybody wants a real nice deck, that glass tile is usually about $10 more a linear foot. An average pool is around 100 linear feet that we build. So I mean, if you factor that in, usually it's about $1,000 more to upgrade the glass tile on a pool. So I mean, the features are one of the biggest things, and when I say features, I also mean the finishes. So sun shelf, $1,500, adding a spa, we already talked about this, $10,000-$15,000 with the heater and everything. You start adding benches, lights, all kinds of other stuff. It adds up real fast. You add a bubbler with an LED light on a sun shelf, usually that's about a $2,000 upgrade. And it's not just because the bubbler costs that much. The body of the bubbler, the plastic case, is usually about $200 for us to buy. We have to run water. We have to run electrical. We have to put an LED light in it. There's a lot that's involved, in that little thing. So, I mean, you're adding, a couple grand if you add a bubbler to it. Something that's inexpensive, that a lot of people add are the umbrella holders. Umbrella holders are very easy for us to install. They're 99 cents to buy. They're very inexpensive. They're just a clear little plastic case that we put in the concrete. So that's a good little addition to customize your pool. So a lot of people, when I'm designing pools, what I see is they start out with an X pool. They say, hey, I got a budget of 90 grand. We design the pool. It's this, and this. And then they say, hey, I want deck jets on the deck. I want 6 LED lights. I want, waterfall back here. I want a spa. I want this. I want turf on the deck, and then all of a sudden turns into a $120,000 pool. And they go, whoa, 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 whoa. I told you, I only got $90,000 to work with. So the design's the same, you're just adding features to the pool, so it's really hard. Every pool is customized. There's no just, hey, I'm going to stick this pool behind your house. I mean, yes, you can do that, but the deck's all different, the way it connects to your house, and most existing decks, most houses have existing lanais. Usually we match those, meaning we texture and paint those, or overlay the pavers that we do to match those. So, when you guys ask the question of how much pools cost, generally you need between $60,000 and $100,000 for a pool in Brevard County. Costs are going up. I wish that we were marking them up more and making a ton. That is not the case. Our profit margins are lower than they ever have been in the industry. Everything just costs a lot. All our materials cost a lot. Try hiring a laborer for $12 an hour. You're not going to find one, or you're going to get a crackhead. Laborers we're paying, in $20 to $30 an hour nowadays. So labor, materials, everything is sky high. Even these permits, engineers, I mean, everything costs more. There's no such thing as putting a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 pool in anymore. It just you can't do it. I've been in this industry my entire life, and back in the day, 20 years ago, we used to do pool spa screens for $20,000. A screen used to cost $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Now that it's $15,000 to $20,000. A pump back in the day. A pump used to cost, if you called me and said, hey, I need a replacement horse and a half, it used to be $550 installed, $450 for the pump, $100 for the install, bada bing, bada boom. Now you call me and you say, hey, my variable speed pump is gone, which usually they last a while, so it's not common that you get this. It could be $2,000 to $3,000 to replace that pump. So it's every aspect of it. We have to use variable speed pumps on the pool. That's a code. We have to put 2 drains in a pool. That's a code, for anti-entrapment, the Virginia Baker Act. We have to bond all the pools. It's just like seatbelts in a car. You can't buy a car without seatbelts, but you're paying for them. You can't buy a car without airbags, but you're paying for them. It's the same thing with pools. We have to put all these, safety features in them now, that we didn't used to have to do. And we think they're a great thing. Child safety and family safety is our number one priority. And thank God we've never had anything happen, to anybody in our pools. But that is an expense, guys. So if you guys want to know how much a pool costs, feel free to call. I answer realtors. I answer people that are buying houses. I answer people that are building houses every day. You guys need a survey, just email me the survey. I'll give you a general idea how much they cost, but you cannot just message us on Facebook and say, hey, how much does a pool cost behind my property? It's all custom. We have to look at elevations. We have to look at utilities. We have to look at access to the property. I mean, there's so many factors that one doesn't fit all. So, please call. We're here to answer your questions. We do it all day long. That's why I'm making this video, is to kind of help you guys, in the process. It's getting busy out there. The last year has been pretty slow in the industry. It's getting super, super busy. We're having another flood of out-of-state people move here. That doesn't really change the cost of pools. We don't raise our margins because we're getting busy, or we don't lower them because we're getting slow. It just with the suppliers and everything, it's a supply and demand. They raise the cost on supplies when the demand's higher. So usually year to year, pool costs go up 5, 6, 7% per year, and that's not us as a company raising them. That's all the materials and supplies. All the suppliers usually send us, in November, December, the letters that saying, hey, our supplies are going up: concrete, rebar, PVC, pumps, filters, lights, everything. This year Pentair also dropped a whole nother line of equipment. Everything is getting automated now. I mean, as you can see with everything in our life, our garage door openers are working from our phones. Our lights on the front of our house you're using from your phone. Everything is going to automation. It's the same thing with pools. It's hard to get a pump that's run by a little analog timer. Nowadays they're all ran by cell phones, which again, it's very nice to have. It's a luxury, but you're paying for it. And it's not like, I wish these manufacturers will make a simple, old school system. They don't. It's just not how it works. They compete with other companies, and they all come out with the same products. So guys, feel free to call me. I'm Steven. I'm the owner of Aquatic Pools. Been doing this my entire life, in Brevard County. I've never done it anywhere else. I know a lot of people in the industry. Feel free to call me. I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys have about pricing. Thank you, and have a great day.